Hello everyone. So I wanted to make a video of a full IFR flight in a Boeing 737 just to show off all the different procedures and methods that I use personally when I do this flight. So I'm by no means an expert, but I think I have a pretty good grasp of this airplane. So I'd like to share it with you just to show the kind of steps that I go through on my entire flight, and maybe this will help you out in one way or another. Alright, let's get started. So first of all, what I like to do is I like to go ahead and pull the jetway down for our passengers, our virtual passengers, to enter the plane. So what you're going to do that is press Control J, and you'll see the jetway start moving right there. And then as soon as that comes out towards your plane, you can go ahead and hit Shift E, and that's going to open up your exit. You see up here it says main exit open. Alright, so now while we're letting our virtual passengers board, we've got a couple different things we want to go through here. So first of all, to pull up the dashboard or knee board of information, you go ahead and hit Shift F10, and I like to look at the Nav Log here, and under heading it says 299 for the airport we're flying to, which happens to be SeaTac. We're flying from Boise to Seattle today. So the heading is 299 or 299. So what I like to do with that is I like to put that in as my course number. I haven't really exactly been able to find a solid answer online as far as what number you're supposed to put for the course. So if anybody has a better suggestion, please feel free to let me know in the comments, but for now this is what I use for that, and that seems to work okay. So until I have a better idea of what I should put for that, it seems to work just fine. So we're going to go ahead and turn our flight director switch on, and what that does is that adds that little pink crosshair there that gives you kind of a better idea of if you're basically operating your aircraft correctly or within the correct parameters of how the airplane should be behaving and handling based on the instructions and speed and pitch and angle and trim and all that information that you've given. So it just kind of gives you an idea if you're flowing the right way. So another thing that I like to do is I like to set this, which is the speed in air knots, to 240, just because when you're under 10,000 feet, you're not supposed to go above 250 knots. So I like to set that for 240, at least until we get to 10,000 feet, and then we'll bump it up a little bit from there. But for now, that's what I have it set as. So we're going to set our flaps to 5. You'll see right down here is where our flaps meter setting is. So for this Boeing 737, for some reason in this cockpit, the 3D view, the auto brake knob does not work, but you're going to want to set that to rejected takeoff. I'll go ahead and do that now. The knob is not going to show it, but I'll go ahead and go to the 2D cockpit by pressing Shift A, and you'll see in the 2D cockpit that the knob is correctly showing that it is on rejected takeoff. I'm not really sure what the problem is, or if it was just a mistake on the design or something like that. I know there have been mods that have edited that and have made the knob working in the 3D cockpit, but for now it is what it is. So we're going to go ahead and switch back to the 3D. Okay, so at this point we're going to go ahead and contact air traffic control to get our clearance.
Boise clearance delivery, Alaska 2245 IFR to Seattle, ready to copy.
Alaska 2242 is cleared to Seattle Airport as filed. Fly runway heading, climb and maintain 8,000. Departure frequency is 119.6, squawk 7061.
Alright, so we're going to go ahead and read that back, and then we're going to set our altitude to 8,000 on our autopilot dash.
Climb and maintain 8,000. Departure on 119.6, squawk 7061.
Alaska 2284, reach back to
And in this
contact
case,
ground on 128.
I'm sure anybody who has any experience with the Boeing 737 knows that it can be kind of a hassle in this simulation anyways, of the heading as well as the bank angle limit. See how it says bank limit right there, but then you move over just a bit and then that's the heading. So what I like to do is I like to turn the bank limit on mine to 20%. It seems like the turns are a little less steep, and I'm not exactly sure what they do in reality, but I think 20% seems a lot smoother and a lot more comfortable for passengers that might be aboard the plane. It's a little less steep. Alright, so next we're going to go ahead and we're going to wait for a moment to tune the ground, because we'll do that when we're ready to taxi, but we've got a couple more things we got to do first. For the vertical speed, I like to set that to about 4,000. Remember, this is during the initial climb, so as we get further up in the air, that'll decrease significantly, but for now, that's a good, you'll see when I activate the autopilot, that's probably about a good ascent rate at which to have that set as. So next, we're going to go ahead and look at our lights, and a lot of these are pretty universal with most aircraft. So with our plane for now, with the anti-collision light, you're going to want to have that pretty much on the entire time you're in the plane. So that starts off on. Your logo light, which is basically your tail light, you're going to want to have that one on. And this would be a lot more important if I was flying in the dark or dusk. And since this is in the middle of the day, it's not as important, but I just do this out of habit. I do the lights the same way every time, whether it's day or night, just because your simulation light bulbs aren't going to burn out, so it's not as big a deal to have them on in here as it might be in reality, that you wouldn't want to be wasting your bulbs. So at this point, we're going to have our logo light on and our anti-collision light. Strobe light, not yet. Taxi light, not yet. Runway lights, not yet. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and request our taxi clearance at the same time that we are shutting our door and pulling back the jetway. So let's go ahead and tune the ground while we're doing that.
Boise ground, Alaska 2245 with Zulu, ready to taxi IFR. Alaska 2245.
So we're shutting the door,
shortest runway 10 left,
pulling back the jetway.
Contact tower on 119.0 when ready.
We're going to acknowledge the taxi clearance.
And hold short runway 10 left.
And personally, I like to use the progressive taxi. You don't have to, but it makes taxiing certainly a lot easier. Okay, so we're going to turn on our taxi light at this point. And this is the only time in the video that I'm going to do this. I'm going to pop outside of the plane, the viewpoint, just to see the direction on what the arrows are facing for the progressive taxi, since there's a chance we're probably not going to be able to see it from the cockpit. Oh, we do see it. You can see the yellow arrows right there. So that's actually pretty sweet. That way we actually don't have to leave the cockpit at all during this flight, so that's cool. Alright, so we're going to go ahead and turn our no smoking and our fasten seatbelt lights on at this point. We're going to release our parking brake, which is period. And then there's been kind of like a not so clear explanation as far as how to turn when you're doing your pushback. So basically, as soon as you hit Shift P to start your pushback, you immediately press 1 if you want to go back into the left, or 2 if you want to go back into the right. And since we're going to want to go back into the right, since we're going to be going to our left here, we're going to want to back the plane up to the right. We're going to hit Shift P and 2. So we'll go ahead and do that now. So Shift P, 2. And you'll see that it'll take you out straight for a little bit of distance, then see it'll start turning you backwards whichever way you want to go. And usually this would be controlled by a little vehicle like this. It wouldn't be controlled by the pilots. That's another reason why I don't think it's too, you know, unfairly cheating as far as the simulation goes to exit the plane to view which way you need to back up. But we didn't have to do that this time, so that was pretty cool. Just a little bit further. Okay, so when you're done with the pushback, you can hit Shift P again, and you'll stop. And at this point, we can add a little bit of throttle, probably about 30% or so. You don't want to go too fast or too herky-jerky. Just enough speed to go ahead and get to where you need to go. And another thing I like about the progressive taxi is it kind of shows you the routes that the you know, actual airplanes would take. So then once you get some practice, especially if you fly out of the same airport frequently, you would actually be able to at a certain point stop using the progressive taxi and just know where to go and how to get there. But for now, we'll use this. This is a pretty good speed right here as far as the taxiing speed. We're going about 47 knots, maybe a little fast. Probably want to go more around like maybe 30 to 40 while you're in a little open space like this, not around turns and stuff. But now we can start pulling back on the throttle since we can see that the turn towards the runway is up there just a little bit from here. And whenever you're using the brakes, if need be, just pump them gently, don't just hold them. See how I'm pumping them kind of intermittently? And that puts us right in the position where we need to be, right at the right point that we're stopping. So obviously you'd like a little less braking than that probably, but it wasn't too bad. So we're going to hit Control period to set our parking brake so we're not rolling when we don't want to. We can go ahead and turn off the taxi light at this point, and we're going to go ahead and turn on our strobe light as well as the runway lights, and we're going to go ahead and contact the tower to get our takeoff clearance.
Boise Tower, Alaska 2245, ready to go. Runway 10 left, IFR to Seattle.
Alaska 2245, hold short. Runway 10 left. Traffic is Boeing 737 on final.
Okay, and that's a good example. I'm glad that happened this time. So instead of giving us clearance, they say that to hold short because there's a 737 about to land. So that you can see it right there. So that was good. That it's good that we waited and made sure to try and get our clearance before just going out there without checking in. So it'll just be a moment here while we wait for this guy to come land. If this was at night, you would definitely want to shut your strobe lights back off because you wouldn't want to cause the, and your runway lights. I believe, I'm not 100% sure, but definitely the strobe, you wouldn't want to cause that pilot any issue landing with his visibility. Here it comes, almost down. We've got a busy day in Boise today. Man, that guy's... that took forever to get his front wheel down. Okay. So we're still just waiting for clearance to take off. Sorry about this, guys.
Contact ground on 121.7. Alaska 2245 cleared for takeoff to runway 10 left.
Alright, and there's our clearance, so we'll go ahead and acknowledge that, and we'll get going. So let's get our strobe light back on, as well as our runway lights. We're going to release our parking brake, and we're going to accelerate slowly and smoothly. to turn ourselves into position to get ready to take off. Okay, so for this part of the flight, I'm gonna switch to the 2D cockpit. It's really up to you which one you would prefer, but you kind of need to know your ground speed and your airspeed for that matter, as well as the pitch of your airplane in this scenario. So you can either click on these like this to see your engine status as well as the pitch of your aircraft as well as your speed, or you can go to the 2D cockpit like that. And actually we'll go ahead and keep it in the 3D cockpit for this since that's what we're doing mostly anyway, so we'll go ahead and do it this way. Alright, so we have our rejected takeoff is off, rejected takeoff auto brake is on, we have our flaps set at 5, our autopilot is all set up the way we need to be, our lights are all in the correct positions, no smoking, fasten seatbelt lights are on as well. I think we are ready to go. So at this point we're going to go ahead and set our parking brake. We're going to spool the engines up to 40. So you'll see right here when they get to 40, that's when you release the parking brake and go smoothly up to 100. We're watching our speed here on the left hand side. Okay, it's okay if you go a little bit over 100, you want to pull it back. So at about 145, 150, you're going to start pulling back gently. Okay, so then about that angle, you're going to go ahead and retract your landing gear. You're going to pull your flaps back to 0.
Contact Boise, departure on 119er.60.
You're going to turn off your brakes from rejected takeoff to back to off. You're going to go ahead and acknowledge the handoff here.
119er.6, Alaska 2845.
Okay, so now we can close that and this now that we're actually in the air.
Altimeter 2992, Alaska 2245, turn left heading 300, Jumo navigation, climb and maintain 2000.
Okay, so now we can turn our autopilot on, and it said to turn left 300. So we're going to go ahead and switch our heading here to 300. There we go. Okay, we're still doing good here. We're at about 8,000.
Alaska 2245.
And now that says climb and maintain 20,000. So we're going to go ahead and bump the altitude up on our autopilot to that, as well as acknowledge that.
Flight level 200, Alaska 2245.
Okay, so we can kind of head and pull back just a bit on the throttle to about 95% at this point. And then since we're almost to
Alaska 2245, turn left heading
over 10,000 feet, we can go ahead and bump this up to 300, and then once I activate that, we'll be over 10,000 feet. Okay, so we need to acknowledge the turn left heading 270.
Turn left heading 270.
So we're going to change that to 270. Oops. There we go. Okay, and it looks like we are over 10,000 feet. So we can go ahead and turn on auto arm or auto throttle and then hit the speed, and that's at 300, so that'll prevent us from going into overspeed at all. We can increase our level of vertical climb.
Alaska 2245, contact Salt Lake Center.
Since we still got a lot of boost here.
118.05.
At this point, we're going to go ahead and shut off our runway lights as well as our logo light since we're over 10,000 feet.
Salt Lake Center, Alaska 2245 is at
And you'll kind of want to keep an eye on, see how we're going 3,500 feet a minute ascending. You kind of want to keep an eye on how that relates to your speed as well, because the higher up you get in the air, the harder it is for the plane to ascend more, so you don't want your speed dropping too much. Otherwise, as you go up, you're going to want to bring this number down, but at 3,500 is okay for now since we're still in the beginning of our ascent. If you wanted to check your GPS, you can hit Shift 3, and this is something that you'll definitely want to get familiar with if you're not already. But for now, we don't need to do anything with the GPS at this moment, but we will be back to this more times in the course of the rest of the making of the video, so we'll be back to that here in a little bit. Okay. So now that we've got our correct direction, you can see that the airport that we just took off of is right there, and that's downtown Boise. Periodically, you'll want to go ahead and check your air traffic control, especially if you don't hear anything from them for a while, because sometimes it's easy to forget that you're supposed to tune to a different frequency, and then you'll be wondering why nobody's talking to you, and then you'll see that. So just, you know, every couple minutes or so, just check that window real quick just to make sure.
Alaska 2245, contact Salt Lake Center on 128.05.
Okay, so we're going to go ahead and do that. We've leveled out at 20,000 because that's what we've been cleared for, but we're going higher than that.
Flight level 200.
Alaska 2245, Salt Lake Center, roger. Alaska 2245.
There we go.
Climb and maintain flight level 300.
Climb and maintain flight
So now we've been cleared for our cruising altitude of what I set in our, when we made our flight plan, is I set for 30,000 feet, which basically for the Boeing 737, the sweet spot is between 30,000 and 33,000 feet, I found, depending on which direction you're going and what your preference is. For reference, if you're flying from west to east, for instance, if you're going from Seattle to Boise or Seattle to Florida or New York, or basically anywhere from west to east, you'll want your altitude to be an odd number, so that would be 31,000 feet is what I would have set it. But since we're flying from Boise to Seattle, which is east to west, you're going to want your number to be even, so that's why I have it at 30,000 feet. And that's a aviation rule for, I'm not sure if it's for the world or for just the United States, but it's definitely a standard of which is followed pretty routinely. So we're just kind of keeping an eye on our altitude here as well as our speed. Checking our air traffic control menu every now and then. You'll just kind of want to just keep it nice and steady. Nothing too wild or crazy. So we're going to go ahead and pull up our GPS once more. And once you're close to that red burgundy-ish line, that's going to be your flight plan line. So once you're close to that line, like we are right now, what you can go ahead and do is you can change. That's perfect timing. See how they say turn right heading 300 or 300?
Turn right heading 300, proceed on
You can
course.
either do that,
Latitude 245.
or you can just go ahead and flip the GPS and then this to VOR LOC. And what that's going to do is that's going to now, instead of, that's switched our navigation of our autopilot from our personal own navigation to the GPS's flight plan. So now that we've got it switched to that, it's going to go ahead and follow the line there. So that basically disregards the heading that's right here. So just remember when it's set to nav, you're going to want to have your heading selection, and that's going to be this. When you're doing your GPS, you're going to want to have that set to GPS and that to VOR LOC. Okay, so, and then there's a couple things that change here once you do end up making that switch. See, because now that we're flying off the GPS, it shows you how far away our distance is, as well as there's a couple other things that do change, and you'll see towards the end of the flight once we switch back over to nav. So now that we're at 28,000 feet and our speed is dropping a little bit, we can go ahead and make our decline a little less steep. But we're in the good range right now. It's not anything dangerous or unsafe to have that speed. That speed's just fine. But if you get under 200 when you're ascending, that's probably when you're ascending too steeply. Obviously, you're not going to immediately stall if you go under if you go under 200 at all, but the whole idea of this is to try and make it as realistic as possible. And if you're in a commercial plane with passengers, you probably don't want anything to be too steep or too jerky or uncomfortable or terrifying or anything like that. Okay, so now that we're at our cruising altitude here, we've reached our 30,000 threshold. To reset the altimeter, if need be, you press B on the keyboard. Now that didn't do anything because 2992 is the correct setting, but if the setting was different and I had pressed B, it would change automatically. So that's another thing I like to do maybe a couple times, 2 or 3 times a flight, is just press B just to make sure my barometer is set correctly. So since we're at our cruising altitude, we can go ahead and shut off our fasten seatbelt sign lights. The smoking one has to remain on, unfortunately. But here at this point, depending on, there's a couple different things that has an effect on this as far as how fast or how far you can push the engines or how fast you can comfortably go. I think fuel amount, how heavy the aircraft is, air pressure outside, payload amount. There's lots of different variables that affect on how fast or not you should be able to, but it's not really that big of a difference number wise. It's usually between a 5-10 different amount. I usually like to go, if anything, to the bottom of the yellow. Just inside the bottom of the yellow I think is okay. So that looks like that's about 310. So we can go ahead and switch this right here to 305. I'd say 310 would be okay, but it's not too significant of a difference. Just keeping it, you don't want to go over speed or anything like that, and there's no need to push it any further than that. But you could go up to 310 if you wanted to, and it wouldn't be a big deal, just because it'd be barely inside that little yellow bracket there. But 305 is cool. And at this point, all you're going to do during the flight is just kind of keep track of everything. You're kind of just the monitor at this point. Your autopilot has the course set for where you're going. Engines, all the engine numbers look good. Fuel's good. Doesn't seem to be too jerky or losing altitude or anything like that. All suddenly, everything seems to be going about as well as it could be right now. So at this point in the flight, all that you're doing really is just going to be transferring frequencies. This is barring any sort of weather, inclement weather or anything like that. But since this is fair weather, we're not going to have any sort of tornado gusts all of a sudden or anything like that. So at this point, you're really just going to be changing frequencies with air traffic control as you travel to your destination. So at this point, we're going to go ahead and skip forward until the point, and I'll be back with you when it's time to land, so I can show you how to do that from that point on.
Alaska 2245, descend and maintain flight level 240.
Alright guys, we are back and we've been instructed to descend, so we're going to begin our descent.
Flight level 240.
So that's to 240. So we're going to go ahead and drop to 240 here. Let's put on our seatbelt light first. And then we're going to go ahead and go to 240. Our descent rate at 2,000 is pretty good, and we're going to drop our speed to 270. There isn't really a set rule as far as your speeds or how they go. These are just the speeds I found work best for me. They seem pretty consistent, I think, with how you would do it generally. So, I mean, they seem to work for me anyway. So, we're going to go ahead and put our flaps out to the second level.
Orbit 1725, descend and maintain 7,000.
Descend and maintain 7,000.
And you can see on the GPS here that it says we're about 88 miles away from our destination. So we can probably up our descent a little more rapidly. Kind of just keeping an eye on everything at the moment. And then what I like to do as I get closer to the flight level that they've instructed, kind of even out your descent, so we can kind of make that a little less steep. Makes it so it's not a sudden jump once you get to the point where you want your aircraft to be. I believe that's Mount Rainier, if I'm not mistaken. Okay, so we're almost to 24000 as far as our flight level goes.
Alaska 2245, descend and maintain 12,000.
Okay, so now we've been instructed to descend to 12,000 feet, so we're going to go ahead and do that too now as well. Sometimes you have to get that to move that a little bit to keep going, because if you had seen there for just a moment, it wasn't descending like it should have been. Sometimes you just have to make one little adjustment to remind it that of the vert speed that you want it to go. Not all the time, but sometimes.
Alaska 2245, you are 75 miles southeast, turn left heading 260, expect vectors ILS, runway 30.
Okay, so this is the part where you're going to go ahead and switch back to nav. So it says 260, so we'll go ahead and set that to 260. Switch back to nav, and this back to heading select. And as you see, it says that we've been to expect vectors ILS runway 34 right approach. So at this point, well, after this,
134.905, Alaska 2245. Seattle Center, Alaska 2245.
just to make sure they don't want to run anything else by us at this point.
Alaska 2245, Seattle Center, roger.
Okay, so 34 right. So what we're going to do is we're going to open up our GPS. We're going to go over here. Now we're going to hit that to give us the ability to control this. Push this arrow. So now what we're going to do is we're going to enter in our destination. So for our example here, which is SeaTac, we're going to go KSEA. And hit enter. And we'll take care of this real quick. So 295. Okay, so now that we have this set appropriately for SeaTac, so we're going to go over to this page right here, click that, and then we're going to go ahead and go down to find 34 right on the ILS. So that's ILS 34 right, so that's 110.30. So now down here, we're going to enter that in. So 110.30, and then make sure to make that the active. And then what I like to do as well is click on the nav1 down here. So that'll give us the Morse code notice once we are in range, just to let us know. Make sure our bank limit is still at 20 degrees. Pretty virtual mountain there. A little bit of clouds. And see, our distance has changed. It's disappeared because we've switched back from the GPS to back to our own nav, so that's not going to be there any longer. But you're going to notice more and more info pop up in relation to what we have put into our nav frequency as far as getting locked in with the ILS and stuff like that, but you'll see as we go. Okay, so we're almost to 12,000, so we can kind of smooth out our descent a little bit here. And I wanted to do this with fair weather just to kind of, so it's easier to see the visuals, but this would be the same process as if this was a true IFR, like if it was super foggy. Okay, so 8,400, I'm going to drop down a little further, and since that's under 10,000, we want to make sure that we are also reducing our speed, so at this point I would like to go to 240. Seeing how the descent there is only 600, even though it's set to 2,000 up here, that's what I was talking about. So you have to change a little bit to get it to restart going again. See, there we go. Now it's dropping down like it's supposed to. Since we're about to cross the 10,000 threshold here, we're going to go ahead and turn on our logo light as well as our runway lights back on, or our landing lights, I should say. Okay, so we're about 1,000 away from 8,400, so once again we can kind of smooth out our descent. At this point, you're really just monitoring all your instruments and your speeds and everything like that, just making sure that everything is going according to plan. Which so far, so good. Making sure to periodically check our air traffic control menu. And it's really important to make sure, obviously I'm sure everybody knows this already, but to make sure that you are exactly at the altitudes that they have cleared you for, especially in situations like this where the terrain might be, you know, a little up and down, or other airplanes, for instance.
Going to 120.1, Alaska 2245. Seattle approach, Alaska 2245, wait.
Alaska 2245, Seattle approach, roger. Altimeter 2992.
End of this video, I'm also going to include a screenshot of my layout for my joystick as well for everybody to see, just in case there's certain buttons that I'm pushing and you might not be able to see. Okay, so it's at 260, so we'll go ahead and switch that here.
Alaska 2245, turn left heading 255.
So we're going to go 255. It's at 6,600. And I apologize if my lingo isn't exactly on point. Okay, so there's our Morse code notification of our that we're connected to the frequency. So you can see the ID number right there, and then we're going to go ahead and click that so it doesn't keep beeping at us. And then you also see here that we've had some more things pop up on our screen here as well as down here. So this is starting to come together to show us our basically our landing at our destination. So that pink bar right there, that's going to be kind of your flight plan as far as how it lines you up with the runway. You'll see as we progress. this little pink diamond is the same as far as how you're lined up, left or right. Okay, so we're going to descend to 5,000.
Alaska 2245.
See, and all the while we're going to be kind of reducing our speed as well, just periodically, not that much. It's kind of a thing that you'll get the feel for as you go. There isn't like any exact numbers you should use, but as you get more experience doing it, you'll get the feel for what speeds you want at relatively what altitudes and at what points in your descent. So I think this would be like the Auburn, Kent area, somewhere around there.
Alaska 2245, descend and maintain 2,700.
Okay.
Descend and maintain 2,000.
Now we're going down a little further to 2,700. Can reduce our speed a little more.
Alaska 2245, you are 21 miles south, turn right heading 315, descend and maintain 2,200. Cleared ILS, runway 34, right approach, maintain 2,200 until established on the localizer. Contact Seattle Tower on 119.9er.
Turn right heading.
Okay, so at this point, once they'll do a readout like that, usually when you're about 20 to 30 miles out.
Right approach, maintain 2,200 until established.
So that's giving us our heading, our altitude,
Alaska 2245.
as well as our runway approach.
Seattle Tower, Alaska 2245 is 20 miles south, inbound ILS, runway 34 right approach. Alaska 2245, Seattle Tower, fly straight in, runway 34 right, altimeter 2992. Fly straight in, runway 34 right, Alaska 2245.
And then as soon as we're at the heading that they've given us, which is 315, or at least close to it, we can go ahead and click the APP, which is your approach button. And there you'll see now that the below glide slope light has lit up, as well as you now have the pink diamond for the way you're lined up horizontally, and then your glide slope diamond, which is that pink one right there. So at this point you're not going to be able to see because it's buttons on my joystick, but I am setting my auto brake, again remember the knob is broken, to 1. I'm also arming my speed brake. Now since we're at about 200 knots, we can go ahead and set out another level of flaps, so to 5. And then since kind of we're on the home course here, we can start reducing our speed even further. Because you're going to want to be about 140, roughly around there when you're landing. And you'll see here shortly that with the APP, the approach button pressed, that the plane will start automatically lining you up with the runway. See how the heading light has turned off? So the heading is no longer locked because the approach has determined that it needs to turn you. So this is doing this all automatically. So this is super useful. So about 180 knots, you can probably put out another layer of flaps. So we're at 10 at this point. This says we're about 10 miles away, so we can drop our speed now to 160. Oops, not that slow. There we go. And you are going to experience, while putting out your flaps, you'll probably experience getting the angry noise it does when you're going too fast for the level of flaps that you have set out. But it's really just kind of just getting a feel for what speeds that you can set yours out at what points. So you can see here we're now at 15. Our speed's about 165. Probably put out another layer, or another level, excuse me. And about 8 miles, 7-8 miles away from your destination is a good distance to extend your landing gear. Obviously pretty important. So we can go ahead and put that down. See how that went down. And that also changes the amount of drag on your airplane as well. So it's always good to kind of have an idea of the effect that's going to have on you before you're actually right about to land. So you can see, obviously, that we're getting pretty close to the runway. So we're going to go ahead and slow down. This is the last change we're going to make as far as the speed goes. Down to 140. And then you'll see that the altitude light has also gone out. And that's automatically as far as the approach making that adjustment for you. So we can go ahead and put out another level of flaps.
Runway 34 right.
We've been cleared to land.
Runway 34 right. Alaska 2245.
So our flaps are at 30 at this moment. Everything's looking pretty good. See the pink diamond right there? That means we're pretty much right on the glide slope. And again, the approach mode of the autopilot is handling pretty much all of this. So we're at about 145 knots, so we can put out our last level of flaps. I don't think it's 100% necessary. I've heard kind of either or, just depends on what, but you know, 30 or 40. You'll definitely want to be on either one at this point. Your landing gear's down, your lights are on, your landing lights. You have your speed brake armed. Ooh, there's a little turbulence. Little whippy. So sometimes, but not always. Sometimes you definitely gotta keep your eye on how it's going as far as your approach goes, because sometimes it'll start going not good, not appropriate as far as what you're trying to do. So at this point, you're going to want to go ahead and turn off your autopilot. At this point, you're going to want to, it's usually you get right over the threshold of the runway. You're going to want to pull your throttle back.
Don't sink.
And then right at the end here, you're going to flare up. And we're doing our reverse thrust at the moment here. Until our plane starts to slow, then we can turn off our auto brake. We can retract our flaps. Make sure that's off here.
121.7, Alaska 2245.
And then we're going to go ahead and go park at our gate here. So just nice and easy. Pull up there. And then usually what we do prior is you want to shut off your landing lights and your strobe light as you exit the runway. And then we can hit Control J and see our jetway is pulled out, so we can go ahead and hit our parking brake. Our jetway's come down, we can turn off our seatbelt lights. And that's the end of our flight. So I hope you enjoyed this video, and yeah, hopefully you learned something from it. If you have any questions or comments, just leave them down below, and thanks for watching.